The December wind howled like a wounded animal across the abandoned lot behind Willow Creek's forgotten gas station. There, pressed against rusted metal, Shadow's emaciated frame curled tighter around her whimpering puppies. Once a proud German shepherd, her matted fur now hung in frozen clumps, her ribs visible beneath a coat dulled by neglect and abuse. Blood from reopened scars stained the fresh snow crimson. With each approaching footstep, Shadow's amber eyes darted frantically between her puppies and the human figure emerging through the swirling snow. Her body trembled violently, not from the biting cold, but from the memory of hands that had only brought pain. Mason Calloway froze in his tracks. After 40 years of handling police dogs, what he witnessed made his weathered heart crack. A mother's desperate, broken gaze, silently begging both for help and for mercy. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Mason Calloway had seen enough broken things in his 72 years to recognize when something was worth saving. The wind bit through his worn Carhartt jacket as he stood at the edge of the abandoned gas station lot, snow collecting on his silver hair. Willow Creek, Colorado wasn't much of a town anymore, just a scattering of homes and farms 30 miles from anything resembling civilization, the kind of place where winters swallowed people whole if they weren't prepared. Mason's weathered hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket for the beef jerky he'd been saving for lunch. His arthritic joints protested the cold, a reminder of decades spent training police dogs in all manner of weather. His small ranch house sat a mile down the road, the only place he'd called home since Elizabeth passed 5 years ago. The silence there had become its own presence, growing heavier with each passing season. "Easy now," he whispered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." The German shepherd's eyes never left him, intelligent and wary. Mason had worked with enough service dogs to recognize the posture. This wasn't just any stray. The way she positioned herself between him and her puppies, the assessment in her gaze, she'd had training, good training, and someone had betrayed that trust badly. The old gas station had been closed for nearly a decade, another casualty of the highway bypass that had slowly strangled Willow Creek's economy. Its abandoned shell provided minimal shelter from the elements, enough to block the wind, but little defense against temperatures dropping well below zero at night. The forecast called for the worst blizzard in 50 years to hit within the next 24 hours. Looking at the mother dog's condition, Mason doubted she or her puppies would survive it. The chain around her neck told another story, not a collar but a heavy, rusted tether that had worn raw patches into her fur. She hadn't simply been abandoned, she'd escaped from somewhere, dragging that weight with her while heavily pregnant or already nursing. The thought made Mason's jaw clench, stirring an anger he thought had dulled with age. "Been a dog's age since I've seen a shepherd like you," he said softly, using the steady tone he'd employed with nervous canines for decades. "You've got good instincts, bringing your little ones here. Out of the wind, at least." Mason knew he should call animal control, but the county shelter was overcrowded and understaffed. A mother with puppies, especially one showing signs of aggression from abuse, wouldn't last 48 hours before being put down. That reality sat like a stone in his gut. He couldn't walk away. Not from this. Not when he recognized something in those amber eyes, a fighting spirit that reminded him too much of the dogs he'd once lived for. The approaching storm painted the sky a threatening gray-blue behind him. Time was a luxury neither he nor these dogs possessed. Mason set the beef jerky on the snow and took 3 careful steps backward. The shepherd's gaze never wavered, a mixture of hunger and suspicion battling behind those amber eyes. Her puppies, 3 small bundles barely visible beneath her protective stance, whimpered softly. One poked a tiny head out, nose twitching at the scent of food, before the mother nudged it back with gentle insistence. "I'll wait," Mason said, easing himself down onto an overturned milk crate just outside the abandoned gas station's maintenance bay. His joints protested, another unwelcome reminder of his age. The cold had a way of settling into old injuries, and Colorado winters were unforgiving to men who'd spent decades tackling suspects and scaling fences with K-9 partners. 20 minutes passed in standoff silence. The dog hadn't touched the jerky, but she hadn't retreated further into the shadowed recess of the building either. Progress of a sort. Mason had trained enough animals to know patience often made the difference between success and failure. He began talking, his voice low and steady. "Name's Mason Calloway. Used to run the K-9 unit over in Grand Junction before these hands got too stiff for the job." He flexed his fingers demonstratively. "Been retired going on 7 years now. Just me and that little ranch house down the road." The dog's ears twitched at the cadence of his voice. Mason continued, keeping his tone conversational, the way he'd done countless times during long training sessions and stakeouts with his four-legged partners. "Storm's coming, big one, according to Bill Thompson's arthritic knee. And that old coot's knee is more reliable than any meteorologist I've ever known." Mason chuckled softly. "Reckon you've got about 12 hours before it hits, and these old walls won't keep you warm enough." As if on cue, the wind picked up, sending a swirl of snow through the open side of the maintenance bay. And the mother dog shivered visibly, but held her position. One of the puppies began crying more insistently, a high-pitched sound of distress that tightened Mason's chest. "That little one doesn't sound too good," he observed quietly. "Might be the runt. Always harder on the smallest." The shepherd looked down at her puppies, then back at Mason. Something in her expression shifted. A calculation happening behind those intelligent eyes. Desperation was a powerful motivator. Mason had seen it in humans and animals alike. Finally, with deliberate slowness, the dog stretched her neck forward and grabbed the jerky, retreating quickly to her puppies. She tore it into smaller pieces, nudging the food toward the smallest pup first. The maternal instinct overrode her hunger. "Good mama," Mason murmured approvingly. He reached into his pocket and withdrew another strip of jerky, placing it closer to himself this time. A test. The shepherd watched him with renewed wariness. "I've got a warm place," Mason said. "Food, blankets, but you're going to have to trust me." Trust was a currency this dog had clearly been bankrupted of. The way she flinched at sudden movements, the defensive posture, the chains she'd escaped with, all pointed to systematic abuse. Working with police dogs, Mason had seen the aftermath of fighting rings and backyard breeders. The thought of what this animal had endured made his weathered hands curl into fists. On the third piece of jerky, the dog ventured closer before retreating. Progress. Mason checked his watch. The temperature was dropping more rapidly now, the sky darkening earlier than usual with the approaching storm front. Time wasn't on their side. "Mason Calloway, what in God's name are you doing sitting in the snow like a fool?" The voice startled both man and dog. The shepherd retreated with a warning growl as Bill Thompson's ancient pickup truck rumbled into the lot. Bill, 80 years old with a face weathered like a topographical map, leaned out his window. His service dog, a chocolate lab missing one ear, sat alert in the passenger seat. "Got a situation here, Bill," Mason replied without taking his eyes off the shepherd. "Mother dog, 3 pups. Looks like she's been through hell." Bill's expression softened as he spotted the animals. "Well, I'll be. That the shepherd been hanging around these parts? Emma's been leaving food out back of the diner for her going on 3 weeks now." Mason raised an eyebrow. "And nobody thought to mention this? Figured she was just passing through. Lot of strays used that old highway since the mill closed." Bill studied the situation. "Storm's coming in faster than they predicted. Thompson Nee says we've got maybe 5 hours, not 12. Need to get them out of here before it hits. She's too scared to let me close. Bill reached into his glove compartment and produced a paper bag. Emma sent this. Said you hadn't been in for breakfast 3 days running. He tossed the bag to Mason, who caught it one-handed. Inside were still warm sausage biscuits. Your timing's either terrible or perfect, Mason said, extracting a biscuit. The savory aroma filled the cold air immediately. Bill grinned. Emma says I've never been on time for anything except dinner in 50 years of marriage. Mason broke the biscuit into pieces, creating a small trail leading from the shepherd toward himself. The dog's nose twitched, hunger warring with caution. I'll head back and get my garage ready, Bill said, understanding the delicate operation unfolding. Got that old whelping box from when Sadie had her litter last year. Emma's been storing it for the Hendersons. Mason nodded without looking away from the shepherd. Appreciate it. After Bill's truck rumbled away, Mason continued his patient work. The mother dog eventually ventured forward, following the trail of food, each step cautious but driven by necessity. When she was within arm's reach, Mason could see the full extent of her condition. Beneath the matted fur were half-healed wounds, some still seeping. The chain had rubbed her neck raw. Despite this, her eyes remained alert and intelligent, a fighter. That's it, girl, he encouraged softly. Nothing to fear here. The dog snatched the last piece of biscuit and retreated, but not as far this time. Progress. It took another hour of this careful dance before Mason could get close enough to assess the puppies. The smallest one concerned him most. Its breathing seemed labored, its movements minimal compared to its siblings. Need to get this little one warm, Mason told the mother, who watched his every move with intense focus. All of you, really. The light was fading fast, the temperature plummeting with the setting sun. Mason had only one option left. He removed his heavy Carhartt jacket, ignoring the bite of cold against his flannel shirt, and gently placed it on the ground. I know you don't trust me yet, he said, but we're out of time. With careful movements, Mason began gathering the puppies. The mother growled low in her throat but didn't attack, another indication of her training. Police dogs were taught restraint, to warn before engaging. This confirmed his suspicions about her background. The smallest pup felt alarmingly cool in his hands as he placed it on his jacket, followed by its siblings. The mother paced anxiously, torn between protection and threat. Your babies need help, Mason told her firmly. I'm taking them to warmth and safety. You can follow us or stay here, but they can't survive this night in this place. With deliberate slowness, Mason bundled the puppies in his jacket and stood, wincing as his knees protested. The mother dog barked once, a sharp, distressed sound. I know, girl. Feels like you don't have a choice. Been there myself. Mason began walking toward his truck, each step measured, allowing the shepherd to keep pace. She followed at a distance, alternating between anxious whines and warning growls. When he reached his old Ford pickup, he carefully placed the bundled puppies on the passenger seat, then opened the back door of the extended cab. Your choice, he told the mother, standing back. For a long moment, the shepherd remained frozen, conflicted. Then, as the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, she made her decision. With painful dignity, she limped to the truck and leapt into the back seat, immediately scrambling forward to check on her puppies. Good girl, Mason said, relief evident in his voice. Let's get you home. As the truck pulled away from the abandoned gas station, the snow began falling in earnest. By morning, the spot where they had been would be buried under 2 feet of snow. The timing had been closer than Mason wanted to admit. The drive to his ranch was tense, the mother dog alternating between anxiously checking her puppies and watching Mason with alert wariness. The smallest pup had grown quieter. Not a good sign. Mason's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Hang on, little one, he murmured. Just a few more minutes. His modest ranch house appeared around the bend, a single light burning in the kitchen window where he'd left it on that morning, a habit Elizabeth had insisted upon. "Always leave a light on," she'd say. "Makes coming home feel like someone's waiting." For the first time in years, someone would indeed be waiting when Mason returned. Mason's ranch house stood as a testament to simpler times, a single-story structure with weathered cedar siding and a wraparound porch that had seen better days. The motion sensor floodlights illuminated the falling snow as he pulled into the gravel driveway, casting long shadows across the accumulating white blanket. "Home, sweet home," he said quietly, glancing in the rearview mirror at the shepherd. Her eyes reflected the artificial light, two amber orbs of vigilant concern. The smallest puppy had grown alarmingly still during the short drive. Mason cradled the bundle against his chest as he navigated the icy path to his front door, the mother dog following at a cautious distance, chain dragging behind her. The other two puppies squirmed weakly within his jacket. Inside, Mason headed straight for the mudroom. He'd converted it into a makeshift kennel years ago when he occasionally boarded retired police dogs as a favor to his former colleagues. An old quilt lay folded on a cedar chest. He spread it quickly in the corner where a large dog bed still sat. "Here we go," he murmured, gently placing the puppies on the soft surface. The mother immediately circled them, sniffing each one thoroughly before settling beside them, her body curved protectively around her litter. The smallest puppy, a female with a white star on her chest, barely moved. Mason's weathered hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. "Dr. Bennett, it's Mason Calloway." He kept his voice low, eyes fixed on the struggling puppy. "Got an emergency situation. Mother shepherd, 3 puppies, smallest one's in trouble." Dr. Elizabeth Liz Bennett had been the local veterinarian for the past 15 years, operating a mobile practice that served the rural communities around Willow Creek. Her voice came through clear despite the worsening weather. "How bad?" "Bad enough I'm calling you before a blizzard," Mason replied grimly. "I can be there in 40 minutes if the roads hold." He could hear her already gathering supplies. "Keep the pup warm, not hot, mind you. Warm, and try to get some sugar water in it if you can." Mason hung up and went to work. From a kitchen drawer, he retrieved a digital thermometer from his old canine first aid kit. The puppy's temperature registered dangerously low. "Not good," he muttered, heading to the kitchen to prepare sugar water in a small eyedropper he kept for medicating his arthritis-plagued retriever before the old dog had passed the previous winter. When he returned, the mother dog growled softly, her posture tense. "I know you don't trust me," Mason said evenly, "but that little one needs help right now." He sat cross-legged on the floor, ignoring the protest in his knees, and gently lifted the smallest puppy. The mother's growl deepened, but she didn't move to attack, another sign of her professional training. Canine units taught their dogs to show restraint, to warn before engaging. This confirmed his earlier suspicions. "Good girl," he murmured, as much to the mother as to the tiny pup now cradled in his palm. He carefully administered drops of sugar water, watching with relief as the puppy's tongue weakly lapped at the liquid. While waiting for Dr. Bennett, Mason attended to the mother's immediate needs. He filled a bowl with water and placed it within her reach, then rummaged through his freezer for the venison steaks his neighbor had given him after hunting season. "Protein's what you need," he told the shepherd as he defrosted a steak in the microwave. Her eyes never left him, tracking every movement with military precision. The chain around her neck bothered Mason profoundly. It was secured with a heavy padlock, the key long gone. He'd need bolt cutters to remove it. What kind of person chains a dog like this? The thought kindled a slow-burning anger in his chest. The distinctive sound of tires crunching on newly fallen snow announced Dr. Bennett's arrival just as Mason finished setting out the meat for the mother dog. He hurried to open the front door. Elizabeth Bennett epitomized the rural veterinarian, practical, no nonsense, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering and resolved too much of it to be easily rattled. At 45, her dark hair was streaked with premature gray, pulled back in a functional ponytail. She carried 2 heavy medical cases and stamped snow from her boots on the porch. Storms coming in faster than they predicted, she noted, stepping inside. Her gaze immediately located the animals in the mudroom. Let's see what we've got. The mother dog's posture stiffened as Dr. Bennett approached, but Mason spoke quietly. "Friend," he assured the shepherd, "she's going to help." Dr. Bennett assessed the situation with professional efficiency, examining each puppy before turning her attention to the mother. "She's severely malnourished, dehydrated. Those wounds are infected." She gestured toward the chain. "We need that off." Mason retrieved bolt cutters from his garage while Dr. Bennett prepared injections of antibiotics and fluids for the mother dog. When he returned, she had somehow gained enough of the shepherd's trust to examine her more thoroughly. "Hold her still," Dr. Bennett instructed, and Mason knelt beside the dog, speaking softly into her ear as he gently but firmly gripped her collar. With a metallic snap, the chain fell away, revealing raw, infected skin beneath. "Bastards," Dr. Bennett muttered, immediately cleaning the wound. "This dog was chained for months, Mason. And look at these scars on her flanks. Someone used her as a punching bag." The smallest puppy began seizing suddenly, its tiny body convulsing. Dr. Bennett moved with practiced urgency, administering an injection while Mason held the tiny creature steady. "What's happening?" he asked, his throat tight. "Hypoglycemia, hypothermia, probably dehydration too." She worked methodically, connecting a tiny IV line to deliver fluids. "These pups can't be more than 4 weeks old. Too early to be weaned, and Mom doesn't have enough milk with her condition." For the next hour, they worked side by side, stabilizing the mother and puppies. The smallest one remained the most critical, requiring constant monitoring. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the eaves of the old ranch house. "You're not driving back in that," Mason observed as Dr. Bennett peered out the window at the whiteout conditions. She nodded, resigned. "Wouldn't be the first time I've been stormed in with a patient. I've got emergency overnight bags in my truck." As she went to retrieve her things, Mason found himself alone with the shepherd and her puppies. The mother's eyes were growing heavy from the sedatives Dr. Bennett had administered to treat her wounds, but she fought to stay alert, protective instinct warring with exhaustion. "You can rest," Mason told her gently. "Nobody's going to hurt your babies here." Something flickered in those amber eyes, a glimmer of understanding, perhaps even trust. Slowly the shepherd lowered her head, though her body remained curved around her puppies. Dr. Bennett returned, shaking snow from her coat. "It's coming down sideways out there. Radio says this could last 36 hours. She set her bag down and knelt to check the puppies again. The smallest one had stabilized somewhat, but still concerned her. "She's a fighter," Mason observed. "Hope," Dr. Bennett said suddenly. At Mason's questioning look, she shrugged. "Seems like a fitting name for the little one." "Fighting against hope." Mason nodded, feeling something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight band that had constricted his heart since Elizabeth had passed, since his forced retirement, since the days had blurred together in isolated monotony. "Hope," he repeated softly. "And the mother?" Dr. Bennett studied the sleeping shepherd. "That's your department. You're the canine specialist." Mason considered the dog's resilience, her protective nature despite obvious abuse, the shadows in her intelligent gaze. "Shadow," he decided. "She's been through the dark places." They settled into a rhythm over the next few hours. checking temperatures, administering medications, preparing formula for the puppies to supplement what little milk Shadow could produce. The other two puppies, both males, grew more active with each feeding. Strong little fellows, Dr. Bennett noted. What are you calling them? Mason hadn't thought that far ahead. Names had power. They implied permanence, attachment. Haven't decided, he hedged. Around midnight, as the storm reached its full fury outside, Dr. Bennett's phone rang. She stepped into the living room to answer it, returning with a troubled expression. That was the sheriff. Highways closed. They're expecting power outages across the county. She glanced at the medical equipment. We need to conserve battery power and be ready if your electricity goes. Mason nodded grimly. His generator hadn't been serviced in over a year, but it would have to do. I'll check the fuel level. The blast of Arctic air that hit him when he opened the back door nearly took his breath away. The thermometer on the porch read 15 below zero, and the wind chill would push that even lower. Mason thought of Shadow and her puppies huddled in that abandoned gas station and felt a surge of gratitude that he'd found them when he did. When he returned, Dr. Bennett was bent over Hope, her expression grave. "What is it?" Mason asked, his stomach tightening. Her temperature's dropping again, the infections overwhelming her system. She looked up at Mason, her professional detachment slipping to reveal genuine concern. She needs more than I can provide here. Mason understood what she wasn't saying. In a fully equipped veterinary hospital, Hope might stand a chance. In a snowbound ranch house with limited supplies, the prognosis was grim. We do what we can with what we have, he said firmly, echoing the mantra that had guided his police career. What's next? A hint of a smile touched Dr. Bennett's lips. We keep fighting. I've got one more trick up my sleeve. She reached into her medical bag and withdrew a small vial. Experimental antibiotics. I've been saving them for extreme cases. As she prepared the injection, Mason sat beside Shadow, who had awakened and was watching them with alert concern. Your little girl's in good hands, he assured her. Dr. Bennett administered the medication, her touch gentle but confident. Now we wait, she said. The wind howled louder, rattling the windows. Mason rose stiffly, his old joints protesting the hours spent on the floor. I'll make coffee. Going to be a long night. In the kitchen, as he measured coffee grounds into the filter, memories surfaced unbidden. Nights spent in police vehicles with his canine partners, the comfortable silence of two beings working in perfect harmony. He'd missed that connection more than he cared to admit. You were K-9 Division, right? Dr. Bennett asked, accepting the steaming mug he offered upon his return. I remember treating some of your partners over the years. Mason nodded, easing himself into the old armchair he'd positioned near the mudroom door. 27 years. Would have been 30 if my hands hadn't betrayed me. He flexed his fingers demonstratively, the arthritis visible in their slightly gnarled appearance. You trained my brother's dog, she said unexpectedly, Travis Bennett. He was Willow Creek Sheriff's Department before he transferred to Colorado Springs. Mason's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Travis Bennett, tall fellow, scar above his right eyebrow? She nodded. That's him. I remember. Good handler. Had a Belgian Malinois. Ranger, wasn't it? That's right. Something in her tone changed, grew guarded. They don't work together anymore. Before Mason could inquire further, a sharp whine from Shadow drew their attention. The shepherd had risen, nosing anxiously at Hope, who had begun trembling violently. Dr. Bennett moved with urgent precision, checking the puppy's temperature. She's spiking a fever now, her system's fighting back. The night stretched into a tense vigil. Outside, the storm raged unabated, the wind finding every crack and crevice in the old house, creating an eerie symphony of whistles and moans. Inside, the battle for Hope's life continued with quiet intensity. Near dawn, as Mason dozed fitfully in the armchair, he was awakened by a strange silence. The storm had paused, or perhaps he'd simply grown accustomed to its constant roar. He opened his eyes to find Shadow standing before him, her gaze intent. "What is it, girl?" he murmured, instantly alert. Shadow turned, limping back to her puppies, then looked over her shoulder at Mason, a clear invitation to follow. Dr. Bennett had fallen asleep on the sofa, her medical journal open on her chest. Mason moved quietly to the mudroom, where Shadow stood over her puppies. Hope lay still, frighteningly still. Mason's heart sank as he knelt to check on the tiny puppy. But as his fingers gently touched her side, he felt it, the steady rise and fall of breathing, stronger than before. Her small body was warm, not hot with fever or cold with approaching death, but the healthy warmth of a sleeping puppy. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, a smile breaking across his weathered face. "You're a fighter, little Hope." Shadow made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and settled back beside her puppies, her mission accomplished. She had brought Mason to witness the miracle. Her puppy would live. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the snow-covered windows, casting the room in a soft, ethereal glow, Mason felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. These creatures needed him. For now, at least, that was enough. The blizzard transformed Willow Creek into an isolated island of scattered homesteads, connected only by radio waves and shared concern. For 3 days, Mason's ranch house remained cut off from the outside world, save for crackling updates on the emergency broadcast system and occasional satellite phone check-ins from Sheriff Miller. The power had flickered twice but held, a small miracle given the ferocity of the storm. In that snowbound sanctuary, a remarkable transformation began to unfold. Shadow, still wary but no longer panicked, had developed a tentative routine. She accepted food from Mason's hand, watched him prepare formula for her puppies with attentive interest, and even allowed him to check their temperatures without the low warning growl that had marked their first encounters. "She's beginning to trust you, Doctor," Bennett observed on the morning of the 4th day, as they watched Shadow accept a gentle scratch behind her ears from Mason, the first voluntary contact she had permitted. "Not trust exactly," Mason replied, his voice soft so as not to disturb the moment. "More like a professional courtesy between two veterans. She's sizing me up, figuring out if I'm worth investing in." Dr. Bennett smiled at that. The roads remained impassable, but the forecast promised clearing skies by afternoon. She had stayed far longer than expected, sleeping on Mason's sofa and conducting remote consultations with her other patients via satellite phone. The enforced proximity had forged a comfortable camaraderie between them. "The little ones are gaining weight," she noted, kneeling to examine the puppies more closely. Hope, against all odds, had not only survived but begun to thrive, her appetite growing stronger each day. The other two, whom Mason had tentatively begun calling Scout and Ranger, were developing distinct personalities, squirming enthusiastically during their examinations. "They're going to need names," Dr. Bennett prodded gently. "Real ones." Mason hesitated, hands busy preparing the morning formula. Naming meant attachment, permanence, decisions he wasn't ready to confront. "We'll see," was all he offered. After breakfast, while checking his generator's fuel levels, Mason heard the distinctive rumble of Bill Thompson's ancient snowplow attachment clearing the long driveway. The old veteran had modified his F-250 years ago to help neighbors during the worst winter storms, a service that had become increasingly valuable as county resources dwindled. "Thought you might be getting cabin fever," Bill called through his rolled-down window as Mason trudged through knee-deep snow to greet him. or running low on supplies. "Appreciate the rescue," Mason replied, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Dr. Bennett's been stuck here since the storm hit." Bill's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Pretty doctor, snowed in for days. Sounds like the start of one of those romance novels Emma keeps by her bedside." Mason felt an unexpected warmth creep up his neck. "Nothing like that. She's here for the dogs." "Dogs?" Bill's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. Mason explained the situation while Bill nodded thoughtfully, occasionally glancing toward the house. "So that's the shepherd Emma's been feeding behind the diner," he mused. "Poor thing looked half wild whenever we spotted her. Emma will be relieved to know she's safe." He shifted gears abruptly. "Need anything from town? Roads are clearing and I'm making a supply run." Mason considered the dwindling food stores and the extra mouth to feed. "Could use some groceries. And whatever puppy supplies the general store might have." "Consider it done." Bill handed Mason a thermos. "Emma sent her chicken soup. Said even a stubborn old mule like you needs proper feeding during a storm." The soup was still hot, rich with vegetables and chunks of chicken, the kind of homemade comfort that had become rare in Mason's solitary life. He shared it with Dr. Bennett for lunch, along with the crusty bread Bill had also delivered. "Your neighbors seem very invested in your welfare," she observed, accepting a steaming bowl. Mason shrugged. "Small towns. Everyone knows everyone's business." "It's more than that," she countered. "They respect you, care about you." Before Mason could formulate a response, Shadow appeared in the doorway, her posture alert but no longer defensive. Her wounds were healing well, the raw skin around her neck beginning to scab over where the chain had rubbed it raw. "She's looking for lunch," Mason said, grateful for the interruption. He prepared Shadow's meal, a careful balance of protein and supplements designed to help her regain strength while producing milk for her puppies. As they watched Shadow eat with deliberate dignity, Dr. Bennett broached the subject Mason had been avoiding. "What happens when the roads clear, Mason?" The question hung between them, laden with implications. Mason stared out the window at the brilliant white landscape, pristine and unforgiving. "Legally, I should report finding them," he said finally. "County Animal Control would take over. And they'd be separated. Shadow would be evaluated, likely deemed aggressive or special needs due to her history of abuse. The puppies would have a better chance at adoption, but hope—" He trailed off, unwilling to articulate the likely outcome for the runt with ongoing medical needs. Dr. Bennett nodded, understanding the unspoken reality. Rural shelters with limited resources made difficult decisions daily. "There are other options," she suggested carefully. Mason felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight band that had constricted his heart for so long. "I know," he said quietly. That afternoon, as watery sunlight broke through thinning clouds, Mason ventured into his cluttered garage. In the far corner, covered by a tarp and years of dust, stood a collection of equipment he'd brought from his canine training days: agility obstacles, scent boxes, training leads, and reward toys. He ran weathered fingers over the familiar tools, memories surfacing like air bubbles in still water. "Been a while," he murmured to himself, methodically sorting through the items. Some would need repair, others replacement, but the fundamentals remained sound, like the knowledge stored in his muscle memory after decades of working with service dogs. When he returned to the house carrying an armful of equipment, Dr. Bennett was on the phone with the county sheriff. "Roads to town should be passable by tomorrow morning," she reported after hanging up. "I can finally check on my clinic." She nodded toward the items in Mason's arms. "Planning a comeback?" Mason set down the training leads and bite sleeves. "Just sorting through some old gear." Dr. Bennett's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. Shadow's background training is obvious. The way she assesses threats, her restraint, her intelligence, she wasn't just any police dog. No, Mason agreed, watching as Shadow nursed her puppies in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. She's special. That evening, Bill returned with supplies and news from town. Mason invited him in for coffee, an unusual gesture that reflected his shifting mindset. "Whole town's talking about the shepherd," Bill reported, warming his hands around the mug. "Emma says she first showed up about 2 months back. Already pregnant, skittish as a wild horse. Wouldn't come within 20 feet of anyone, but she'd take the food Emma left out." Dr. Bennett leaned forward, interested. "Any idea where she came from?" Bill shook his head. "Nothing concrete, though Carl at the hardware store mentioned a customer passing through about that time, asking if he'd seen a German shepherd, described a specific chain and lock, said the dog was valuable property." The disgust in Bill's voice was evident. Carl told him he hadn't seen any such animal. Didn't like the look of the fella. Mason exchanged a glance with Dr. Bennett. "Description?" "Tall guy, city clothes, driving a black SUV with Colorado Springs plates." Bill shrugged. "Could be nothing, could be something." After Bill departed, Mason found himself standing in the doorway of the mudroom, watching Shadow and her puppies. The shepherd looked up at him, her amber eyes reflecting the soft lamplight. For the first time since her arrival, she didn't immediately go on alert at his approach. Instead, she shifted slightly, making room beside her on the blanket. An invitation. Moving slowly, Mason eased himself down next to Shadow, careful not to disturb the sleeping puppies. His arthritic joints protested, but the warmth of the dog against his side provided unexpected comfort. "You've had a rough go of it, haven't you, girl?" he murmured, cautiously extending a hand. Shadow allowed the touch, her eyes closing briefly as his fingers found the sweet spot behind her ear. "Someone trained you well before things went wrong." Dr. Bennett found them like that an hour later. Mason half asleep against the wall, Shadow's head resting cautiously on his knee, a tableau of tentative trust. "Looks like you've been accepted into the pack," she observed softly from the doorway. Mason smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "Temporary arrangement." "She's just cold. Keep telling yourself that." Dr. Bennett's gentle teasing masked a deeper observation. The change in Mason's demeanor, the softening of the isolation that had hardened around him like bark on an old tree. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm's fury replaced by pristine stillness. The roads had been plowed overnight, and Dr. Bennett prepared to return to her clinic after one final check of her patients. "Hope is stable, but she'll need ongoing care," she instructed, packing her medical supplies. "The antibiotics need to continue for another week. Shadow's wounds are healing well, but watch for any signs of infection." Mason nodded, committing the instructions to memory. "And the follow-up? I'll come by day after tomorrow." She hesitated, then added, "Unless you're planning to call animal control." Their eyes met in silent communication. Mason glanced toward Shadow and her puppies, then back to Dr. Bennett. "Seems cruel to uproot them just when they're settling in." Her smile was knowing. "I'll bring vaccines on my next visit, then. Start thinking about names for those boys." After Dr. Bennett departed, Mason found himself alone with the dogs for the first time since the rescue. The house felt different somehow. The silence less oppressive. The rooms less empty. He went about his morning chores with renewed energy, occasionally checking on Shadow and the puppies. Around midday, as Mason prepared lunch, he heard a vehicle approaching. Expecting Bill or perhaps Dr. Bennett returning for a forgotten item, he was surprised to see an unfamiliar black SUV pulling into his driveway. The Colorado Springs plates triggered an immediate connection to Bill's story. Shadow sensed the change in Mason's posture. She rose from her blanket, ears forward, body tense. "Easy, girl," Mason murmured, moving to the window for a better look. A tall man emerged from the SUV, his expensive coat and leather gloves incongruous against the rural backdrop. Something about his bearing, the confident stride, the assessing glance around the property, raised Mason's hackles. Old instincts, honed through decades of law enforcement, hummed a warning. Shadow emitted a low growl, confirming Mason's suspicions. She recognized the visitor and feared him. "Stay here," Mason told her firmly, using the command tone that had once directed his K9 partners. To his surprise, Shadow complied, though her body remained rigid with tension. Mason opened the door before the stranger could knock, positioning himself squarely in the doorway. Up close, he noticed the scar above the man's right eyebrow, and sudden recognition dawned. "Travis Bennett," he said, the name falling like a stone between them. The younger man's expression registered surprise, then calculated reassessment. "Officer Calloway." "It's been years." "Retired now," Mason corrected, making no move to invite him inside. "What brings you to Willow Creek?" Travis's gaze shifted over Mason's shoulder, scanning what he could see of the interior. "I'm looking for a dog, German Shepherd female. I have reason to believe she might be in this area." Mason's face revealed nothing, years of interrogation training serving him well. "Lot of strays pass through after storms. Any particular reason you're checking my place?" "My sister mentioned she'd been treating a shepherd here. Elizabeth Bennett. She's the local vet." The connection clicked into place. Dr. Bennett's brother, the sheriff she'd mentioned, now transferred to Colorado Springs, the handler whose dog Mason had trained years ago. "Your sister did assist with a stray I found," Mason acknowledged carefully. "Malnourished, abused, chained with a lock that had to be cut off." He watched Travis's expression closely, looking for a tell. "Any idea who would treat a dog that way?" Something flickered in Travis's eyes. Not guilt exactly, but a complicated emotion Mason couldn't immediately identify. "May I see the dog?" Travis asked, sidestepping the question. "If it's mine, I can provide documentation of ownership." Mason considered his options. Refusing would only escalate the situation and potentially create legal complications. Allowing Travis to see Shadow would reveal whether she truly recognized him and how she felt about him. "Wait here," Mason decided, closing the door partially as he returned to the mudroom. Shadow stood alert, her body positioned protectively in front of her puppies. Mason knelt beside her, speaking quietly. "I need to know if you know this man, girl. I'm going to bring him back here, but I won't let him near you or your puppies if you don't want it. Understand?" The shepherd's intelligent eyes held his gaze, communication flowing between them on a level that transcended words. Mason had experienced this connection before with his K9 partners. The silent understanding, the trust built on mutual respect. When Mason returned to the door, Travis was on his phone, speaking urgently in low tones. He ended the call abruptly when he noticed Mason. "The dog is recovering from severe neglect," Mason said evenly. "She's nursing puppies. I'll allow you to see her, but from a distance and only briefly." Travis nodded, his expression unreadable. Mason led him through the house to the mudroom doorway, positioning himself between the visitor and Shadow. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Shadow's hackles rose, a deep growl emanating from her throat. She backed further into the corner, placing her body firmly between Travis and her puppies. "That's her," Travis confirmed, his voice tight. "Call sign Shadow, service number K97729. She was under my command in the Colorado Springs K9 unit until she was reassigned." Mason's jaw tightened. "Reassigned to a chain and regular beatings?" Travis's expression hardened. "I'm not responsible for what happened after she left my care. Department budget cuts forced us to reduce the K9 unit, Some dogs were sold to private security firms. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. I have the legal paperwork authorizing me to recover her. She's still technically department property. Mason didn't reach for the papers. Instead, he observed the fear in Shadow's posture, the protective stance over her puppies, the clear recognition and terror she exhibited at Travis's presence. "Seems to me Shadow's made her feelings clear," Mason said quietly. "Whatever happened after she left your care, she doesn't want to go back." "With all due respect, Officer Calloway, the dog doesn't get a vote." Travis's tone hardened. "I have the legal authority to reclaim her." Mason felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same stillness he'd experienced in countless standoffs during his career. "The law also has plenty to say about animal cruelty, Travis, and abandonment. I didn't abandon her." A flash of genuine emotion crossed Travis's face. "I fought to keep her. When that failed, I tracked the security firm that bought her. By the time I located them, they'd already sold her to a private buyer. The trail went cold." Mason studied the younger man, trying to separate truth from manipulation. "And now? Why the sudden interest in recovering her?" Travis hesitated, calculating. "The department is reinstating some of the K-9 positions. Shadow's training and experience make her valuable. And those puppies, if they've inherited her aptitude, they could be worth significant money to the right program." The mercenary assessment made Mason's blood run cold. Whatever Travis's initial relationship with Shadow had been, his current interest was clearly financial. "I think we're done here," Mason said firmly, moving to block Travis's view of the dogs. "I'll have my attorney review your paperwork. In the meantime, I suggest you leave before I call the sheriff about trespassing." Travis's expression darkened. "Don't make this difficult, Calloway. I'm trying to do this the civil way." "There's nothing civil about what happened to this dog," Mason replied evenly. "Good day, Travis." After showing Travis out, Mason watched through the window as the black SUV lingered in the driveway for several long minutes before finally pulling away. Only then did he return to Shadow, who remained tense and vigilant. "It's all right, girl," he soothed, settling carefully beside her. "He's gone. For now," he added silently. Shadow gradually relaxed, though she remained more alert than usual, frequently checking her puppies and glancing toward the door. The encounter had clearly shaken her, confirming Mason's suspicions about her history. That evening, as Mason sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink, his satellite phone rang. Dr. Bennett's number flashed on the screen. "Travis came to see you," she said without preamble when he answered. "He did." Mason's response was measured. "Interesting coincidence. Him showing up right after you mentioned treating a shepherd." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "I didn't tell him about Shadow," she finally said, her voice tight. "He must have overheard my conversation with the clinic staff." Mason's grip on the phone tightened. "He claims legal ownership, says she was department property, sold off during budget cuts." "That part is true," Dr. Bennett admitted. "The K-9 unit was nearly eliminated 2 years ago. But what happened to Shadow afterward?" Her voice trailed off. "He seems very interested in recovering her." "And the puppies." Dr. Bennett's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Mason, be careful. My brother, he's changed. There's something going on with him. Something he won't talk about." After hanging up, Mason remained on the porch, watching darkness settle over the valley. The brief winter day had already surrendered to the long night, stars emerging in the crystalline sky. Inside, Shadow and her puppies represented responsibility, complication, potential legal battles, the very entanglements he'd avoided since retirement. Yet as Mason finally rose to go inside, feeling the cold settling into his arthritic joints, he recognized the decision had already been made. Some fights were worth having, some bonds once formed couldn't be casually discarded. Shadow looked up as he entered, her amber eyes reflecting the lamplight. For the first time, she offered a tentative wag of her tail, a gesture of recognition, perhaps even the beginning of trust. "Don't worry, girl," Mason told her quietly, settling into the armchair he'd positioned near her corner. "I've got your back." The second blizzard hit 3 days later with a fury that made the first storm seem like a gentle snowfall. Power lines collapsed under the weight of ice, plunging much of Willow Creek into darkness. The temperature plummeted to 20 below zero, with wind chills approaching -40. Even the emergency broadcast system fell silent as radio towers succumbed to the onslaught. Mason had prepared as best he could, filling every available container with water, stocking the woodpile beside the stove, and ensuring his generator had sufficient fuel for at least 5 days. The ancient furnace in the basement had given up during the first hours of the storm, leaving the wood stove as their only heat source. "Hang in there," he told Shadow as they huddled in the living room, now transformed into a makeshift nursery. The puppies, nestled in a laundry basket padded with blankets, slept peacefully, unaware of the howling maelstrom outside. Mason had moved everyone closer to the wood stove, creating a warm zone in the heart of the house, while the peripheral rooms grew increasingly frigid. Shadow had grown remarkably attuned to Mason's routines in the short time since her arrival. She seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, conserving her energy and keeping vigilant watch over her puppies. Hope, against all odds, continued to thrive, her strength increasing daily despite her rough start. "You're a stubborn little thing," Mason observed, gently checking her temperature. Dr. Bennett had shown him how to monitor the puppy's health, a responsibility he undertook with methodical precision. "Just like your mama." The satellite phone rang shortly after noon, startling Mason. Reception had been spotty at best since the storm began. "Mason?" Dr. Bennett's voice came through, broken with static. "Can you hear me?" "Barely," he replied, pressing the phone tighter to his ear. "You okay?" "Trapped at the clinic," she reported. "Power's out countywide. How are Shadow and the puppies?" "Holding steady. Got the wood stove going. Generators running minimal electric." "Good." Her voice faded momentarily, then returned. "Mason, about Travis?" The connection dissolved into crackling static before cutting out entirely. Mason stared at the silent phone, concern settling in his chest like a cold weight. The truncated warning left too much unsaid, too many possibilities open. He tried calling back several times, but the network had gone down completely. By evening, the storm's intensity had somehow increased, wind screaming around the eaves of the old ranch house like a living entity. Mason rationed the generator use, running it only for essential needs to conserve fuel. The darkness pressed in from all sides, held at bay only by the golden glow of the wood stove and a few strategically placed oil lamps. Shadow's ears pricked suddenly, her body tensing. A moment later, Mason heard it too, the distant sound of an engine laboring through deep snow, growing closer. He moved to the window, peering through frost-edged glass into the swirling darkness. Headlights appeared, twin beams cutting through the snow like dull knives. "Wasn't expecting visitors in this weather," he murmured to Shadow, who had come to stand beside him, her posture alert but not alarmed. The absence of her usual anxiety suggested whoever approached wasn't perceived as a threat. The vehicle, Bill Thompson's unmistakable old truck, fitted with massive chains on the tires, finally reached the driveway, its progress painfully slow against the drifting snow. Mason pulled on his heavy coat and boots to meet him. "Bill, you old fool," he called out against the wind as his neighbor emerged from the truck cab. "What are you doing out in this?" Bill's weathered face was nearly blue with cold, his breath freezing instantly in his beard. "Got Emma and her sister in the truck," he shouted back. "Our place lost the roof. Whole east side caved in from ice weight." Mason's concern immediately shifted to practical matters. "Anyone hurt?" "Just cold and scared. Emma insisted on bringing supplies." Bill gestured to the truck bed where several containers were secured under a tarp. "Get them inside," Mason directed, already moving toward the truck to help. "I'll grab the supplies." Emma Thompson, 78 and formidable despite her small stature, emerged from the truck clutching her cat carrier. Her sister Martha, visiting from Denver when the storm hit, followed with armfuls of blankets. "Knew you'd have that wood stove going," Emma declared by way of greeting, stomping snow from her boots on the porch. "Told Bill this was the closest safe place." Despite the crisis, or perhaps because of it, Mason found himself grateful for the company. The isolation of recent years had been self-imposed, a retreat from connection after too many losses. Now, as he helped settle the Thompsons in his living room, the old house felt properly inhabited for the first time in years. Emma immediately took charge of organizing their supplies: food, water, extra blankets, even a battery-powered radio that still picked up emergency broadcasts from a station in Grand Junction. Martha, a retired nurse, asked to examine the puppies, her experienced hands gentle as she checked each one. "They're doing remarkably well," she told Mason, genuine admiration in her voice. "Especially this little one." She stroked Hope's head with a gentle finger. "You've done good work here." Shadow, to Mason's surprise, accepted the newcomers with cautious tolerance. She seemed particularly drawn to Emma, who spoke to her in the matter-of-fact tone one might use with an old acquaintance. "So, you're the one who's been taking my leftovers all these weeks?" Emma said, carefully extending a hand for Shadow to sniff. "Been worried sick about you since the first storm hit." Bill, warming himself by the stove, watched the interaction with knowing eyes. "Told you Emma's been feeding her behind the diner. That shepherd's got good taste. Emma makes the best meatloaf in 3 counties. The easy banter, the shared warmth and purpose, created an atmosphere Mason had forgotten could exist within these walls. As the night progressed, they established a rotation for tending the wood stove, ensuring it remained fed throughout the dark hours. Around midnight, as Mason took his turn adding logs to the hungry flames, Bill joined him with 2 mugs of instant coffee warmed over the stovetop. "Going to be a rough few days," the older man observed, handing Mason a steaming mug. "Radio says this system stalled. Could be looking at another 48 hours before it moves on." Mason nodded, accepting both the coffee and the grim forecast. "Generator fuel will last 3 days if we're careful. Plenty of wood. We'll manage." Bill studied him over the rim of his mug. "Seems to me you've been managing just fine on your own these past years. But there's a difference between managing and living, Mason." The observation, delivered without judgment, struck closer to home than Mason cared to admit. He deflected with a nod toward the sleeping women and dogs. "Some company now and then doesn't hurt." Bill's knowing smile suggested he wasn't fooled by the casual response. "That shepherd's changed you. Seen it before with broken souls. Sometimes takes another broken soul to start the healing." Before Mason could formulate a reply, the battery radio on the table crackled with an emergency update. Multiple structure collapses reported throughout the county. Emergency services are overwhelmed and advising residents to shelter in place. The National Guard has been mobilized but cannot deploy until weather conditions improve. The broadcast continued with reports of power outages affecting 90% of the region, water system failures, and isolated communities cut off by impassable roads. What had begun as a severe winter storm had escalated into a regional catastrophe. Never seen anything like this, Bill murmured, his usual stoicism giving way to genuine concern. Not in 60 years in these mountains. As if responding to the gravity of the situation, Hope began whimpering in her sleep. Shadow immediately rose to check on her, nosing each puppy gently before settling back down, her vigilant gaze sweeping the room before coming to rest on Mason. The connection between them had deepened in ways Mason hadn't anticipated. Shadow now looked to him not just as a provider of food and shelter, but as a partner in protecting her puppies, a profound trust from a dog who had every reason to distrust humans completely. Dawn broke with no discernible improvement in conditions. If anything, the wind had intensified, finding new ways to infiltrate the old house's insulation. Mason and Bill took turns clearing the generator's exhaust pipe, which kept clogging with drifting snow. Each excursion outside required careful preparation: full snow gear, face protection, tethering ropes to prevent disorientation in the whiteout conditions. On Mason's third trip to the generator, shortly after noon, he noticed Shadow's unusual behavior. The shepherd had stationed herself by the front window, her posture rigid, ears forward, the alert stance of a working dog who had detected something concerning. "What is it, girl?" Mason asked, following her gaze into the swirling white landscape. For a long moment, he saw nothing. Then, just at the edge of visibility, he caught a flicker of movement, a dark shape struggling through the snow along the property line. "Bill!" Mason called, not taking his eyes from the window. "Someone's out there." Bill joined him, squinting against the glare. "Can't make out much. Vehicle?" "No. Person. On foot." Mason was already reaching for his heavy coat. "Nobody should be out in this." "Could be one of the Henderson boys," Bill suggested, referring to their nearest neighbors, a half-mile down the road. "Their place is vulnerable to flooding if the creek dam gives way." Mason's instincts, honed through decades of law enforcement, registered a note of caution. The figure's approach seemed too deliberate for someone seeking random shelter, too specific in its direction. Nevertheless, leaving anyone to the mercy of the storm wasn't an option. "I'll check," he decided, pulling on his boots. "Keep the door secured until I signal it's safe." Shadow whined anxiously as Mason prepared to leave, her body tense with obvious concern. "Stay!" Mason commanded firmly, using the hand signal that accompanied the verbal order. The shepherd complied reluctantly, though her eyes never left him. The full force of the storm hit Mason like a physical blow as he stepped outside. The wind chill instantly penetrated his layers, stealing his breath. Visibility extended barely 20 feet in any direction, the world beyond transformed into a shifting wall of white. He tied a safety line to the porch post, anchoring himself against both the physical force of the wind and the disorienting effect of the whiteout. Moving cautiously along the property line, Mason followed the faint tracks partially visible beneath fresh snowfall. The trail led toward the old barn, a structure Mason had maintained minimally since selling his horses after retirement. Its solid construction made it a logical shelter for someone caught in the storm. As he approached the barn, Mason noticed the small side door standing ajar, snow already accumulating on the floor inside. Someone had definitely sought refuge here. Drawing on old training, he approached cautiously, announcing his presence before entering. "Hello? Anyone in here? This is Mason Calloway, the property owner." A shuffling sound came from the back of the barn, followed by a weak voice. "Help, please." Mason moved forward, navigating around old farm equipment and stacked hay bales. In the dimness, he made out a figure huddled in the corner. A man, badly hypothermic, judging by his violent shivering and slurred speech. "I've got you," Mason assured him, kneeling to assess the situation. "Can you walk if I help you?" The man's face lifted into a shaft of dim light filtering through the barn's roof boards. Recognition hit Mason like a physical blow. Travis? Travis Bennett's face was nearly unrecognizable, lips blue with cold, skin waxy pale, eyes unfocused. His expensive coat was soaked through, his hands bare and showing early signs of frostbite. Whatever had brought him out in this storm, he'd been unprepared for its severity. "Car! Off-road," Travis managed through chattering teeth. Tried to reach house." Mason's personal feelings toward the man were immediately secondary to the medical emergency at hand. Travis was in the advanced stages of hypothermia, a condition Mason recognized from wilderness survival training with his K-9 unit. "I'm getting you to the house," he said firmly, helping Travis to his feet. "Lean on me. Small steps." The journey back to the house was arduous, the wind actively fighting their progress, the safety line providing their only reliable navigation. Travis stumbled repeatedly, his coordination failing as his core temperature continued to drop. By the time they reached the porch, Mason was practically carrying him. Bill's shocked expression greeted them at the door. "Good Lord above." "Hypothermia," Mason explained tersely, helping Travis inside. "Martha, need your nursing experience. Emma, hot liquids, not too hot. Bill, help me get these wet clothes off him." The next hour unfolded with the focused intensity of a medical emergency. Martha directed their efforts with professional precision, drawing on decades of emergency room experience. They removed Travis's frozen clothing, wrapped him in warmed blankets, and positioned him near, but not too near, the wood stove. "His core temperature is dangerously low," Martha observed as she monitored Travis's pulse. "The rewarming needs to be gradual to avoid shock." Shadow had retreated to her corner with the puppies, her posture tense, eyes fixed on Travis with unmistakable recognition and concern. Not fear this time, Mason noted with interest, but watchfulness. As Travis's condition stabilized, coherence gradually returned. His gaze focused on Mason with growing awareness. "You saved me," he managed, his voice weak but clear. Mason nodded curtly. "Wouldn't leave anyone out in that storm." "What were you doing out there, Travis?" Travis closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Came to warn you." "Warn me?" Mason's guard immediately rose. "About what?" "Shadow." Travis struggled to sit up, wincing as circulation returned painfully to his extremities. "There are people looking for her. Dangerous people. Not police." The statement hung in the air, drawing everyone's attention. Even Emma, typically unflappable, looked concerned. "Perhaps this conversation should wait until Mr. Bennett is stronger," Martha suggested, her medical training asserting priority for her patient's recovery. Mason nodded reluctantly, recognizing the wisdom in her advice. "Rest now. We'll talk when you're stabilized." As Travis drifted into exhausted sleep, Mason found himself standing by the window watching the unrelenting storm with troubled thoughts. Shadow joined him, her warm presence against his leg offering silent companionship. "What kind of trouble are you in, girl?" he murmured, resting a hand on her head. "And why is Travis Bennett suddenly concerned for your welfare?" The answers would have to wait, but Mason's instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive through decades of police work, were signaling caution. Whatever had driven Travis out into a killer storm carried significant weight. And Shadow, who had shown clear fear of Travis during their previous encounter, now exhibited a more complex reaction to his presence. The storm continued unabated through the afternoon, trapping them in a world reduced to the warm circle of light from the wood stove. As darkness fell once again, Mason established a watch rotation, an old habit from his service days. Something about Travis's warning had triggered his protective instincts. During his midnight shift, as the others slept and only Shadow remained alert beside him, Mason noticed headlights cutting through the storm, similar to Bill's arrival but with a different approach. These vehicles, he could make out two distinct sets of lights, moved with purpose, navigating the treacherous conditions with the confidence of specialized equipment. Shadow's hackles rose, a low growl forming in her throat. "I see them too, girl," Mason whispered, reaching for his shotgun mounted above the door, a precaution he hadn't anticipated needing. "Let's hope they're just travelers seeking shelter." But as the vehicles maneuvered into strategic positions around the property, Mason recognized the deliberate tactics of a coordinated approach. This was no random stop, no emergency seeking aid. Shadow pressed against his leg, her body tense but steady. Whatever came through that door, Mason realized, they would face it together. Mason moved with the quiet efficiency that had once been his professional hallmark, waking Bill with a gentle hand over his mouth to silence any startled response. "We have company," he whispered, nodding toward the window where the headlights had now gone dark. "Need to secure the house." Bill's weathered face showed no panic, only grim understanding. The old veteran slipped from his makeshift bed on the couch and moved to wake Emma and Martha while Mason checked on Travis. The younger man was awake, his eyes reflecting comprehension beyond his weakened state. "They found me," Travis murmured, struggling to sit up despite Martha's gentle restraint. "Tracked the GPS in my phone. Should have known better." "Who are they, Travis?" Mason demanded, keeping his voice low. "I need answers now." Travis's gaze shifted to Shadow, who stood alert beside her puppies, hackles raised. "The dogs were never officially department property," he admitted. "That was a cover story. The K-9 program was supplemented through private investment. Shadow was part of a specialized breeding program combining military and police working dog bloodlines. The pieces began clicking into place in Mason's mind. "You sold her." "Not exactly." Travis winced as he shifted position. "The investors claimed ownership when the program was shut down. Said they'd funded her training, her care. They took most of the dogs. I tried to protect Shadow, hid her at my place outside Colorado Springs. They found her anyway." His eyes darkened with what appeared to be genuine regret. "By the time I tracked where they'd taken her, she'd already escaped." The distinctive crunch of boots on snow interrupted their conversation. Mason moved to the window, carefully peering through a small gap in the curtains. 3 figures were approaching the house, moving with tactical precision despite the blizzard conditions. Their dark clothing and coordinated movement spoke of professional training. "3 that I can see," Mason reported. "Likely more securing the perimeter." Bill appeared beside him, his own hunting rifle in hand. "Ranch has 2 main access points, front door and kitchen. Rest are windows, too small for quick entry." Mason nodded, mind racing through defense options. The house wasn't built for security. It was an old ranch home designed for family living, notwithstanding assault. The storm both helped and hindered. The attackers would struggle with visibility and mobility, but so would any potential rescuers. "Emma, Martha, take the puppies and Travis to the root cellar," Mason directed, referring to the old storm shelter accessible through a trapdoor in the pantry floor. "Bill and I will handle this." "Like hell," Emma objected, her diminutive frame somehow imposing as she stood with arms crossed. "This is my home too now, and I'm not hiding while men threaten it." "Emma," Bill began, but his wife cut him off with a sharp gesture. 43 years of marriage, William Thompson, and you still think I need protecting." She turned to Mason. "I can handle a shotgun better than most men half my age. Ask anyone who competed against me at the county fair shooting gallery." Despite the gravity of the situation, Mason felt an unexpected surge of appreciation for this fierce woman. "Martha, can you manage the puppies and Travis alone?" The retired nurse nodded grimly. "Done triage in worse conditions during the Chicago riots. We'll be fine." Shadow whined anxiously as Martha began gathering the puppies into a padded laundry basket. The mother dog clearly understood something was wrong, her intelligent eyes darting between Mason and the windows, ears swiveling toward the sounds outside. "Shadow, stay with Puppies," Mason commanded firmly, using the hand signal that accompanied the verbal order. The shepherd's training was evident in her immediate, if reluctant, compliance as she followed Martha toward the pantry. Emma positioned herself in the kitchen with a clear view of the back door, Bill's shotgun held with comfortable familiarity in her hands. Bill took up position near the front window, while Mason secured a vantage point that offered sight lines to both potential entry points. The first knock, when it came, was surprisingly polite. 3 measured taps against the front door. "Mr. Calloway?" A man's voice, professional and controlled. "This is Carl Donovan with Sentinel Private Security. We need to speak with you regarding property recovery." Mason caught Bill's eye, signaling for silence. Private security had no jurisdiction here, especially during a state emergency. Whatever legal pretense these men were operating under, Mason had no intention of acknowledging it. After 30 seconds of silence, the voice came again, harder this time. "Mr. Calloway, we know you're inside. We know Travis Bennett is here. We know about the dog and her puppies. This can be handled professionally or not. Your choice." Mason's jaw tightened. Their information was too specific, their timing too precise. He glanced toward the pantry, where the trapdoor now concealed Martha, Travis, Shadow, and the puppies. At least they were temporarily secure. A new voice spoke, this one carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to command. "Mason Calloway, former K-9 handler, Grand Junction PD, decorated officer, forced retirement due to arthritis. You understand the value of these animals better than most. The female and her puppies represent significant investment. We're authorized to offer compensation for their return." The calculated recitation of his background sent a chill down Mason's spine. These weren't opportunistic criminals. They had done their homework, planned this operation specifically. He caught Emma's questioning glance from the kitchen and shook his head slightly. No response was their best strategy. The silence stretched for several minutes, broken only by the howling wind. Then came the sound Mason had been dreading, the distinctive metallic click of a lock being manipulated. These men hadn't come unprepared. Mason raised his shotgun, signaling Bill to be ready. The front door opened slowly, a tactical entry designed to minimize exposure. The first man through the door carried himself with military precision, his movements efficient despite the heavy winter gear. He registered Mason's presence instantly, freezing in place as the shotgun leveled at his chest. "That's far enough," Mason said calmly. The intruder assessed the situation with professional detachment. "We're not here for conflict, Mr. Calloway. Just the dogs." "You're trespassing during a state emergency," Mason replied evenly. "Armed trespassing carries significant penalties in Colorado." A second man appeared in the doorway, older, his bearing suggesting leadership. The silver at his temples matched the cold calculation in his eyes as they swept the room, noting Bill's position and the empty spaces where others should be. "Where's Travis?" the leader asked, ignoring the weapons trained on him with the confidence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "And where are the dogs?" "Gone," Mason lied smoothly. "Sheriff evacuated them yesterday before the worst of the storm hit. You've wasted your trip." The leader's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle tensing that Mason recognized from countless confrontations. This man didn't believe him and was weighing options. "Check the house," he ordered the first man, who hesitated, clearly uncomfortable advancing with shotguns, tracking his movement. "That would be unwise," Bill spoke up, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had faced combat. "My wife's covering the kitchen, and she won't hesitate to defend our safety." As if on cue, Emma called out from her position, First man through this doorway gets both barrels. I'm old enough that jail time doesn't scare me much." The standoff crystallized into tense silence, broken only by the constant moan of wind around the eaves. Mason could almost see the calculations running behind the leader's eyes, the risk assessment, the weighing of objectives against potential casualties. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," the leader said finally. "Those animals represent millions in specialized breeding potential. The female alone carried a six-figure contract." "Don't much care about your contracts," Mason replied. "Care about a dog that was abused, abandoned, and is now under my protection." A third figure appeared in the doorway, whispering something to the leader. The man's expression darkened further. "Storms intensifying. Highway patrols closed all access routes within 50 miles. We're all stuck here for at least 24 hours. He fixed Mason with a cold stare. "We can wait." Mason recognized the implicit threat. These men weren't leaving, and the isolated property offered no immediate hope of intervention. They were effectively under siege with limited supplies and vulnerable people to protect. "Seems we're at an impasse," he acknowledged. "You can wait in your vehicles. This house remains private property." The leader assessed Mason for a long moment before nodding curtly. 6 hours. Then we talk again." He gestured to his men, and they retreated, closing the door behind them. The moment they left, Mason moved quickly to secure the lock, adding a chair braced under the doorknob for good measure. Bill did the same at the kitchen door, while Emma maintained her vigilant watch through the window. "They're not leaving," she reported grimly. "Setting up some kind of camp in their vehicles." Mason nodded, unsurprised. "Professional outfit, likely mercenary background." He turned toward the pantry. "Need to check on the others." The root cellar was a relic from the house's original construction, a 12 by 12 underground room with stone walls designed to store food and provide shelter during tornadoes. Mason had maintained it over the years, more from respect for craftsmanship than any expectation of use. Now he was grateful for his diligence as he descended the steep stairs to find Martha tending to Travis while Shadow curled protectively around her puppies in a nest of blankets. "Heard everything," Martha said quietly. Thin floorboards. Travis looked marginally better than before, though still dangerously weak. "It's Donovan," he confirmed, voice barely above a whisper. "Former military contractor. Heads the private security firm that funded the K-9 program." "Ruthless businessman." "What does he want with Shadow and the puppies?" Mason demanded. Travis struggled to sit up straighter. "The breeding program isn't just for police or security work. There's a gray market for specialized protection dogs, cartel leaders, arms dealers, anyone with enemies and money. A dog with Shadow's training, intelligence, and genetic background can command 6 figures easily. Her puppies, if they inherit her aptitude, are equally valuable." The mercenary calculation disgusted Mason. He'd spent his career working with K-9s as partners, as valued team members whose welfare mattered beyond their utility. The idea of breeding them for sale to criminals turned his stomach. "You were part of this," Mason stated flatly. Travis didn't flinch from the accusation. "Initially, I thought it was legitimate, supplemental funding for a department program constantly facing budget cuts. By the time I realized where some of the dogs were going, I was compromised." His expression hardened. "I tried to protect Shadow. That's when they came after me." "The wounds on her body," Martha interjected quietly. "The signs of abuse." Travis nodded grimly. "Donovan's training methods aren't exactly humane. When dogs don't perform to standard, they're motivated through increasingly harsh measures. Shadow resisted, paid the price." A hint of pride crept into his voice. "But she never broke, never gave them what they wanted." Mason studied Shadow, seeing her in a new light. The intelligence in those amber eyes, the dignity she maintained despite her treatment, the protective devotion to her puppies, all pointed to an extraordinary animal who had endured extraordinary circumstances. "How long before they breach the house?" Martha asked, the practical question cutting through the tension. "They'll wait for exhaustion or desperation to set in," Mason answered, drawing on tactical experience. "Standard siege approach. They know we have limited resources and they control the perimeter." "The radio said Highway Patrol is mobilizing with National Guard support," Martha reminded him. "Emergency services should reach isolated areas within 24 to 36 hours. Mason nodded, calculating. "If we can hold out that long, we might see legitimate authorities arrive. But these men aren't amateurs. They'll have contingency plans." A faint whimpering drew their attention. Hope, the smallest puppy, had awakened and was struggling to nurse. Shadow immediately attended to her, but Mason noticed the shepherd's movement seemed sluggish, her normally alert posture diminished. Martha noticed too. "She's weakening," the nurse observed. "The stress, the limited food, the constant nursing, it's taking a toll." Mason made a quick decision. "We need to bring them back upstairs. The temperature down here is too low for the puppies, and Shadow needs proper food and water to maintain milk production." "But the men," Travis began. "Are watching the doors and main windows," Mason finished. "They don't know about the root cellar, which means we can still move between here and the kitchen undetected." The logistics of moving everyone safely occupied the next hour. Mason first secured the pantry, ensuring no watchers could observe their emergence from the cellar. Bill and Emma maintained their vigilant posts while Martha helped Travis navigate the steep stairs. Shadow carried each puppy individually in her mouth, demonstrating the careful precision of a mother who had navigated danger before. Once everyone was settled in the back bedroom, the most defensible space with limited window exposure, Mason convened a war council. "Supplies will last 3 days if we're careful," he reported. "Generator fuel is limited to essential use only. Water remains the biggest concern if power stays out long term." "Your well pump needs electricity, right?" Bill confirmed. Mason nodded. "Got about 30 gallons stored in containers plus whatever snow we can melt. Should be enough until assistance arrives." "If it arrives," Emma interjected pragmatically. "Storm like this, emergency services will be overwhelmed with higher priorities than a few stranded folks." Mason couldn't argue with her assessment. Rural properties like his would naturally fall to the bottom of the rescue priority list, especially with limited resources stretched across a multi-county disaster area. Travis, propped against pillows in the bed, spoke up weakly. "Donovan won't wait for the roads to clear. He has a timetable. Investors expecting delivery. Storm or no storm, he'll move on the house within 12 hours. Mason considered their defensive options. The shotguns provided deterrence but limited practical advantage against professional operatives with likely superior firepower. The house itself offered minimal cover. Their best asset remained the blizzard conditions, which hampered visibility and movement for everyone. Hope's sudden cry drew Shadow instantly to the puppy basket. The tiny dog was struggling, her breathing labored, her small body trembling. "She's crashing," Martha said urgently, moving to examine the puppy. "Her temperature's dropping again. We need heat, more direct heat than the room provides." Mason looked at Travis. "Medications. What did Dr. Bennett use during the first crisis?" "Experimental antibiotics," Travis recalled. "But those were at your house when Donovan arrived? They're probably watching for any attempt to reach Dr. Bennett's clinic." Martha was already improvising, creating a warming nest using hot water bottles filled from the kettle they'd kept simmering on the wood stove. "This will help temporarily, but she needs proper medical intervention." Shadow whined anxiously, nudging her weakest puppy with her nose. The desperation in her eyes mirrored the tightening in Mason's chest, a helplessness in the face of imminent loss. After everything they'd been through, after defying odds and enemies, to lose hope now seemed an unbearable cruelty. Emma, practical as always, broke the paralyzed moment. The old CB radio in Bill's truck. Highway Patrol and emergency services monitor those frequencies during disasters. If we can reach the truck, we might contact help directly. They're watching all approaches to the vehicles, Bill reminded her. Not all approaches, Mason corrected, an idea forming. The storm cellar has an emergency exit tunnel. Original owner was paranoid about tornadoes trapping folks below ground. Exit comes out near the old well house, about 50 yards from where they've positioned their vehicles. The revelation sparked cautious hope among the group. With proper timing and the cover of darkness, someone might reach Bill's truck undetected. It was a desperate plan fraught with risk, but Hope's deteriorating condition left little choice. "I'll go," Bill volunteered immediately. "Know my own truck best." "Your hip won't handle the tunnel crawl," Emma objected, "and your hands are too arthritic for the cold." The unspoken truth hung in the air. Everyone present had limitations. Martha needed to stay with Hope and Travis. Emma, despite her fierce spirit, lacked the physical stamina for the punishing conditions outside. Bill's age and injuries precluded him from the mission. "I'll go," Mason decided, his tone brooking no argument. "After nightfall, Shadow will guard the house while I'm gone." As darkness approached, Mason prepared methodically, layering clothing for maximum protection against the brutal cold. Each minute that passed saw Hope's condition worsen. Her breathing increasingly labored, her tiny body fighting a battle it was gradually losing. Shadow seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The shepherd positioned herself by the bedroom door, alert and watchful, while occasionally returning to check on her struggling puppy. The other two puppies, sensing something wrong, huddled close to their sister. "If I don't make it back," Mason told Bill quietly as he made final preparations, "get everyone into the root cellar and seal it. Supplies down there should last until help arrives." Bill clasped his shoulder firmly. "You'll make it back, you old coot, too stubborn to die in a snowdrift." The gruff affection nearly broke Mason's carefully maintained composure. He'd spent years building walls around himself after Elizabeth's death, after his forced retirement, deliberately disconnecting from the human relationships that could bring both joy and pain. Now, somehow, a desperate dog and her puppies had breached those defenses, bringing with them connections he'd forgotten how to value. As Mason prepared to descend into the root cellar and begin his desperate mission, Shadow left her post to stand before him, her amber eyes holding his gaze with unmistakable meaning. "I'll bring help," he promised her softly. "You keep them safe until I return." The root cellar tunnel was exactly as claustrophobic as Mason remembered. Built during the Cold War era by the previous owner, a retired military engineer with apocalyptic concerns, it stretched nearly 60 yards underground, supported by timber bracing that groaned under the weight of decades. Mason crawled through the narrow passage, his arthritic joints protesting every inch, guided only by the dim beam of a flashlight kept intentionally subdued to avoid detection. The bitter cold penetrated even here, 3 feet below the frost line. Mason's breath crystallized before his face, tiny ice particles forming in his beard. He had dressed in layers, thermal underwear beneath flannel, beneath his heaviest winter gear, but even this substantial protection seemed inadequate against the historic cold snap. Mason's thoughts turned to Hope as he inched forward. The smallest puppy had been fighting since birth, overcoming illness and exposure against impossible odds. She had earned her name through sheer determination. Mason refused to accept that such resilience could be extinguished now, when they were so close to safety. The tunnel ended abruptly at a vertical shaft with rusted metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall. Mason tested each one carefully before trusting his weight to the ancient hardware. The exit hatch above had been designed for stealth, a simple wooden door disguised as part of the well house floor, counterbalanced to open with minimal effort despite its weight. Mason paused beneath the hatch, listening intently for any movement above. The well house had been abandoned decades ago when the property switched to a modern electric pump system, but its sturdy structure remained, providing cover for the secret exit. If Donovan's men had discovered it during their perimeter sweep, Mason's mission would end before it began. After confirming silence above, Mason eased the hatch open a fraction of an inch. Snow had drifted against the structure, leaving only a narrow gap through which he could observe the property. The blizzard raged undiminished, visibility reduced to mere yards even with the security lights Donovan's team had established around their vehicles. Mason counted 3 SUVs positioned strategically to monitor all approaches to the house. Each vehicle maintained a running engine, both for warmth and for rapid deployment if necessary. Through swirling snow, he could make out shadowy figures rotating guard duty, 2 men visible at any given time while others presumably rested inside the heated vehicles. Bill's truck sat abandoned where he had left it upon arrival, now partially buried under drifting snow. The distance between the well house and the truck was approximately 40 yards, an eternity in open terrain during active surveillance. Mason would have one advantage. The guards were focused on the house, not expecting threats from the seemingly empty landscape behind them. Easing the hatch fully open, Mason pulled himself into the well house, careful to disturb the snow as little as possible. The structure's roof had partially collapsed years ago, allowing snow to accumulate inside. He used this to his advantage, gathering handfuls to brush over his dark clothing, creating improvised camouflage against the white landscape. Moving with deliberate slowness, Mason exited the well house through its broken rear wall. The full force of the blizzard hit him immediately, the wind chill approaching 50 below zero. Exposed skin would freeze in minutes under these conditions. Complete exposure would be fatal within half an hour. Mason began his approach using the storm itself as cover. He advanced only when gusts intensified, freezing in place when they subsided. The journey of 40 yards stretched into an agonizing 20 minutes of incremental progress. Twice, he flattened himself into snowdrifts as guards scanned the perimeter with high-powered flashlights. Finally reaching Bill's truck, Mason discovered a new problem. The vehicle was locked, and the keys were with Bill inside the house. Breaking a window would create noise that would immediately attract attention. Mason recalled Bill's habit of keeping a magnetic spare key hidden in the wheel well for emergencies. His gloved fingers, already numbing despite protection, fumbled beneath the truck's frame, searching desperately for the small metal box. The cold was becoming dangerous. Mason could feel the early symptoms of hypothermia setting in, uncontrollable shivering, fumbling coordination, clouding judgment. If he didn't find the key soon, he would need to abort the mission and attempt return through the tunnel. His fingers finally contacted the small metal container. With painful slowness, he extracted the key and carefully unlocked the driver's door, easing it open just enough to slide inside. The truck's interior offered no warmth, but provided critical shelter from the wind. The CB radio mounted under the dashboard represented their best hope of outside communication. Mason switched it on, keeping the volume minimized as it crackled to life. He tuned to the emergency channel used by Highway Patrol during disasters. "This is Mason Calloway, civilian at 1445 Ridge Road, Willow Creek. Emergency situation, medical crisis, and armed hostile presence, requesting immediate assistance. Over." Static answered him. Mason repeated the call twice more, each time met with the same empty response. The blizzard was likely disrupting transmission, or perhaps emergency services had abandoned this frequency during the crisis. As despair began to set in, a faint voice emerged from the static. "This is Colorado Highway Patrol Emergency Response. We read you, Willow Creek residents. Clarify nature of your emergency. Over." Relief surged through Mason as he quickly detailed their situation. The critically ill puppy, Donovan's armed team, the isolated civilians trapped in the house. The patrol officer's response was both reassuring and concerning. "We've got National Guard units mobilized throughout the county, but current conditions prevent air support, and ground vehicles are restricted to emergency routes. Nearest possible response is approximately 6 hours away. Can you maintain your position until then? Over." 6 hours. Mason thought of Hope's labored breathing, her tiny body failing despite Martha's best efforts. "Negative. We have a medical emergency that won't wait 6 hours. Need immediate medical consultation at minimum. Over." A new voice joined the transmission, a woman, her tone professionally crisp. "This is Dr. Sanderson with Emergency Medical Services. I'm monitoring this channel." "Describe your medical case." Over. Mason provided all the details he could recall of Hope's condition and treatment history. The EMS doctor's response was measured but grave. "Based on your description, the puppy is experiencing systemic infection complicated by hypothermia and possible hypoglycemia. Without proper antibiotics and temperature stabilization, prognosis is poor. Over." "We have a retired nurse on site and limited medical supplies," Mason replied. "What can we do with what we have?" Over. Dr. Sanderson outlined a makeshift treatment plan using household items: sugar water for hypoglycemia, carefully monitored warming techniques, improvised electrolyte solution. None offered guarantees, but they might buy precious time. As the doctor finished her instructions, Mason noticed movement near the house, Donovan's men changing guard positions. Their disciplined rotation suggested military background, their weapons barely visible beneath heavy winter gear, but unmistakably present. "One more thing," Mason added urgently. "We have armed hostiles on site, attempting to take possession of the dogs. At least 4 men with tactical training and equipment should be considered dangerous. Over." The highway patrol officer returned to the channel, his voice hardening. "Understood. We're dispatching State Police Tactical Unit to your location as highest priority. ETA still approximately 6 hours due to road conditions. Maintain defensive position and avoid confrontation if possible. Over." Mason acknowledged the instructions while knowing their situation might not allow for 6 hours of peaceful waiting. Hope needed help now, and Donovan's patience was visibly wearing thin as his men endured the punishing conditions. As Mason prepared to exit the truck and return through the tunnel, a new transmission crackled through the radio, weaker, barely audible above the static. "Mason? Mason Calloway? This is Elizabeth Bennett. If you can hear me, I'm monitoring emergency channels from my clinic. What's happening? Over." Dr. Bennett's voice was like a lifeline thrown into churning waters. Mason quickly explained the situation, emphasizing Hope's critical condition. "I have the medication she needs," Dr. Bennett responded immediately. "Specialized antibiotics and supportive treatments. My clinic is only 8 miles from you." "Roads are impassable," Mason reminded her. "And we're under surveillance." "Not all roads," she countered. "The old logging track that runs behind your property connects to County Road 8. It's partially sheltered from drifting. I have chains and a snowmobile in my garage. I can reach you within an hour if I leave now." The offer represented both hope and terrible risk. "Too dangerous," Mason objected. "Blizzard conditions, below 0 temperatures, armed hostiles. Stay where you're safe." "That puppy won't survive 6 hours," Dr. Bennett replied firmly. "And I'll be damned if I let Donovan get his hands on Shadow again. Expect me at the north property line near the old fence gap. 1 hour. Over and out." The transmission ended before Mason could argue further. Elizabeth Bennett had made her decision, displaying the same determination that had defined her career as a rural veterinarian accustomed to extreme conditions and emergencies. Mason exited the truck as carefully as he had entered, relocking it to avoid detection. The return journey to the well house seemed even longer, his body now fighting advanced cold exposure alongside the need for stealth. By the time he reached the tunnel entrance, his movements had become alarmingly clumsy, a dangerous sign of progressing hypothermia. The crawl back through the narrow passage became a test of sheer will. Mason's joints locked up repeatedly, requiring painful effort to force movement. By the time he reached the root cellar, his consciousness had begun to fade at the edges, reality blurring as his core temperature continued to drop. Bill was waiting at the cellar entrance, having grown concerned at Mason's extended absence. "Good God, man," he muttered, helping Mason up the steep steps. "Thought we'd lost you to the cold." "Need warm fluids," Mason managed through chattering teeth, "and dry clothes, quickly." While Emma attended to Mason's immediate needs, hot tea laced with honey, warm blankets, dry thermal layers, he reported on the communication with Highway Patrol and Dr. Bennett's planned rescue attempt. The news was received with mixed emotions, hope for Hope's survival tempered by concern for the veterinarian's safety. "That woman's either the bravest soul I've ever heard of or the most foolhardy," Emma declared, though her tone suggested admiration rather than criticism. Martha had continued her tireless care of Hope during Mason's absence, implementing every home remedy her nursing experience could devise. The puppy remained alive, but deteriorating, her tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. Shadow hadn't left her puppy's side, her intelligent eyes tracking every movement Martha made. When Mason entered the room, the shepherd's attention shifted momentarily, assessing his condition before returning to her vigilant watch over Hope. "She knows," Martha said quietly. "She understands her baby is dying." The stark assessment hung in the air, a truth no one wanted to acknowledge but couldn't deny. Without Dr. Bennett's specialized medications, Hope's chances diminished with each passing minute. Travis, still weakened from his own brush with hypothermia but more alert than before, spoke from his position propped against the headboard. "Donovan won't wait much longer. He knows the storm is hampering potential rescue. This is his window of opportunity." As if confirming his assessment, a sharp rap sounded at the front door, followed by Donovan's measured voice. "Mr. Calloway, your time has expired. We need to discuss terms for the transfer of the animals." Bill moved to the window, carefully peering through a gap in the curtains. "They've consolidated positions. All men visible now, no longer rotating shifts. They're preparing to move." Mason's mind raced through tactical options, none of them promising. They had limited weapons, vulnerable civilians, and a critically ill puppy that couldn't be moved quickly. Dr. Bennett's arrival, if she successfully navigated the treacherous conditions, would occur at the north property line, requiring someone to meet her and escort her safely to the house past Donovan's perimeter. "Bill," Mason decided, "you and Emma maintain defensive positions at the front and rear entrances. Martha, continue caring for Hope. Travis," he paused, reassessing the younger man's condition, "can you move if necessary?" Travis nodded grimly. "Not running any marathons, but I can walk." "Good. You're with Shadow and the puppies. Keep them quiet and ready to move to the root cellar if needed." Mason checked his watch. "Dr. Bennett will reach the north property line in approximately 30 minutes. I need to create a diversion to draw Donovan's attention south while she approaches from the north." "That's suicide," Bill objected. "You're still recovering from hypothermia. Another exposure to those conditions could kill you." "Got a better idea?" Mason countered. When no alternative was offered, he continued outlining his plan. "I'll exit through the root cellar again, circle wide to the south edge of the property, then create a diversion, something big enough to draw their full attention. While they're focused on me, Dr. Bennett can approach from the north. Emma, you'll need to watch for her arrival and provide cover for her entry through the kitchen door." The plan had more holes than Mason cared to admit, relying heavily on timing and Donovan's predictable response to a threat. But with Hope fading and Dr. Bennett already en route, options were limited. As Mason prepared for his second venture into the blizzard, Shadow suddenly rose from beside her puppies and blocked his path to the door. The shepherd's posture wasn't aggressive, but her intention was clear. She didn't want him to leave. "Have to go, girl," Mason told her gently. "Only way to save your little one." Shadow held her ground, amber eyes fixed on Mason with unsettling intelligence. Then, to everyone's surprise, she turned and nudged Travis's hand before returning to Mason's side. "I think," Travis said slowly, "she wants me to go with you." Mason shook his head. "You're still recovering. You'd slow me down." "You don't understand," Travis insisted. "Shadow was trained for tactical operations before she was diverted to the breeding program. She knows Donovan and his men, their scents, their patterns. She's trying to tell you something." Mason studied the shepherd closely. Throughout his career, he'd learned to trust the instincts of his canine partners, often detecting things human senses missed. Shadow's behavior suggested she had a plan of her own. "What are you thinking, girl?" he asked quietly. Shadow moved to the bedroom window, nosing the curtain aside to look out at the swirling snow, then returned to stand beside Mason, her posture alert and ready. "She wants to come with you," Martha observed. "She's volunteering." The realization struck Mason with unexpected force. Shadow was offering to leave her puppies, including her critically ill runt, to help secure their safety. The level of trust and intelligence this represented was extraordinary. "She'd be recognized immediately," Mason objected. "Donovan's men would focus entirely on capturing her." "Exactly," Travis said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The perfect diversion." Mason felt the weight of the decision pressing upon him. Taking Shadow meant separating her from her vulnerable puppies. It meant placing her directly in the path of those who had abused her, who saw her only as valuable property to be reclaimed. Yet her offer represented their best chance of creating the diversion necessary for Dr. Bennett's safe arrival. Shadow made a soft whining sound, moving toward the bedroom door with clear purpose, then looking back expectantly at Mason. "You're sure about this?" he asked her, feeling slightly foolish for addressing the dog as an equal partner, but unable to deny the communication occurring between them. In response, Shadow touched her nose briefly to each puppy, lingering longest over Hope, then returned to Mason's side with resolute determination. "I'll protect them with my life," Martha promised, understanding the sacred trust being transferred. Just like she would. The decision made, Mason and Shadow prepared for their desperate mission. A former canine handler and a battle-scarred shepherd, united by circumstance and common purpose, venturing into a lethal storm to save a tiny life hanging in the balance. As they descended into the root cellar, Mason felt Shadow's warm presence beside him, steady and unwavering despite the danger ahead. Whatever happened in the next hour would determine not just Hope's fate, but the future of all those sheltering within these walls against both the storm's fury and human malice. For the first time in years, Mason found himself offering a silent prayer, not for his own safety, but for the brave veterinarian fighting through a blizzard, for the fragile puppy clinging to life, and for the extraordinary dog who had somehow reawakened his capacity for connection when he thought it long extinguished. The tunnel seemed narrower with Shadow beside him, yet Mason found strange comfort in the shepherd's steady presence. She moved with surprising agility through the confined space, her training evident in the economical precision of each movement. No wasted energy, no hesitation, just focused determination that Mason recognized from his years working with police canines. "Just like old times," he murmured, as they reached the vertical shaft leading to the well house. Shadow's ears twitched in acknowledgement, her amber eyes reflecting the dim flashlight beam. Mason ascended first, testing each rusted rung before committing his weight. The cold had intensified, if such a thing were possible. The thermometer on his watch registered 30 below zero, before accounting for wind chill. At these temperatures, exposed skin would freeze in minutes. Complete exposure meant death within half an hour. Shadow followed him up the ladder with remarkable dexterity, navigating the human-designed structure as if she'd trained for it. When they reached the well house, Mason paused to assess the situation through the narrow gap in the weathered boards. Donovan's men had changed their pattern. No longer maintaining perimeter watch, they had consolidated around the house itself, a clear indication they were preparing to breach. Mason counted 5 figures now, all positioned for tactical entry. Time was running even shorter than he'd anticipated. He checked his watch. 20 minutes until Dr. Bennett's expected arrival at the north fence line. They needed to create a diversion that would draw attention south for at least that long, allowing her to approach the house undetected. Mason knelt beside Shadow, bringing his face level with hers. "We need to be visible enough to draw them away, but not so visible that they can catch us immediately. Understand?" Shadow's steady gaze held his own, a connection that transcended words. Mason had experienced this with his canine partners before, a communication that went beyond commands to a shared purpose, a mutual trust. "Let's move," he whispered, easing the well house door open. The full force of the blizzard hit them immediately. Mason's recently warmed body protested the shock, muscles seizing momentarily before training took over. Shadow pressed against his leg, both for support and guidance through the whiteout conditions. They circled wide around the property, using the storm as cover. Mason's plan was simple but risky. Approach from the south, become visible just long enough to be recognized, then lead any pursuers on a deliberate chase away from the house and the north property line where Dr. Bennett would arrive. When they reached position approximately 200 yards south of the house, Mason removed his heavy flashlight. The powerful beam would be visible even through the blowing snow, a clear signal that would draw immediate attention. "Ready, girl?" he asked Shadow, who had positioned herself alertly at his side. Mason flashed the light 3 times in quick succession, then maintained a steady beam pointed toward the house. Through the swirling snow, he saw movement as Donovan's men noticed the signal. 2 figures immediately detached from the group, communicating with hand gestures before starting toward the light source. "They've seen us," Mason told Shadow. "Now comes the tricky part." He waited until the approaching figures had closed half the distance before shutting off the light and moving laterally through the darkness. Shadow stayed close, her body warmth providing unexpected comfort against the brutal cold. When they'd repositioned about 30 yards east, Mason repeated the light signal. The approaching men changed course, now joined by a 3rd figure. Mason recognized the tactical response. Donovan was committing more resources to the potential threat, exactly as planned. But they were still too close to the house, too likely to be recalled if Dr. Bennett was spotted approaching from the north. "Need to draw them further out," Mason muttered through increasingly numb lips. Shadow nudged his hand suddenly, then moved forward several paces before looking back expectantly. Mason understood immediately. She was offering to become the bait. "Too dangerous," he objected. "They want you alive, but they might shoot me on sight." The shepherd wasn't deterred. She moved deliberately into a small clearing where the security lights from the house created just enough illumination to make her visible. Her distinctive silhouette, a German shepherd with alert ears and proud bearing, was unmistakable even through the blizzard conditions. Mason heard shouts from Donovan's men as they spotted Shadow. Their approach immediately became more urgent, their movements betraying excitement at the unexpected prize presenting itself. Shadow held her position until the men were within 50 yards, then turned and trotted away, maintaining a deliberate pace, fast enough to stay ahead, slow enough to ensure pursuit. Mason followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows while marveling at the dog's tactical intelligence. She was creating exactly the diversion they needed, drawing Donovan's forces south while preserving Mason's concealment. The pursuers fell into the trap, following Shadow with single-minded determination. Their shouts carried through the storm as they called to their companions. Mason counted the shadowy figures, 4 men now committed to the chase, leaving only Donovan himself at the house. Shadow led them on a deliberate course, zigzagging through the property's southern acreage. She appeared to be struggling in the deep snow, occasionally stumbling, a performance, Mason realized, designed to encourage her pursuers while conserving her actual strength. Mason checked his watch. 10 minutes until Dr. Bennett's expected arrival. They needed to maintain the diversion for at least that long, ideally drawing the pursuit even further from the house. Shadow abruptly changed tactics, doubling back toward her pursuers before veering sharply east toward the old barn. The unexpected maneuver created confusion, the men momentarily losing sight of her in the swirling snow. Their frustrated shouts confirmed the effectiveness of her strategy. Mason used the opportunity to circle back toward the house, needing to confirm Donovan's position before Dr. Bennett's arrival. As he approached, he spotted a solitary figure on the porch. Donovan himself, monitoring the pursuit through binoculars despite the limited visibility. A new sound cut through the howling wind, the distinctive growl of a snowmobile approaching from the north. Dr. Bennett had arrived earlier than expected and directly into Donovan's potential line of sight. Mason needed to act immediately. He abandoned concealment, deliberately exposing himself as he moved toward the rear of the property. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness once more, drawing Donovan's attention away from the approaching snowmobile. "Over here!" Mason shouted into the wind, his voice carrying just far enough to reach the porch. Donovan swung around, binoculars focusing on Mason's position. For a long moment he seemed to weigh his options, pursue this new target or maintain his position at the house. Then, with deliberate calculation, he descended the porch steps and began moving toward Mason. Through gaps in the blowing snow, Mason caught glimpses of the snowmobile approaching the north fence line. Dr. Bennett had made it, but remained dangerously exposed if any of Donovan's men returned to the house. Mason needed to keep Donovan occupied for just a few more minutes. "Looking for something?" Mason called out, backing away as Donovan advanced. "You're interfering with a legitimate business transaction, Calloway," Donovan responded, his voice carrying that same professional detachment Mason had noted earlier. "Those animals represent significant investment. Their recovery is simply financial protection." "Those animals have names," Mason countered, continuing his strategic retreat, "and feelings, and rights to more than chains and abuse." Donovan's laugh held no humor. "Sentimentality is expensive. The female alone is valued at 6 figures. Add the puppies, with their genetic potential, and we're discussing 7-figure assets." The calculated reduction of living beings to monetary value revolted Mason. "Is that how you see everything? In dollars and cents?" "It's how the world works," Donovan replied evenly. "Your generation had the luxury of principles. Mine has to survive a harsher reality." Mason caught movement in his peripheral vision. Dr. Bennett had reached the kitchen door, Emma covering her entry with the shotgun. The diversion was working. Now he just needed to extract himself and Shadow from the increasingly dangerous situation. A sharp whistle cut through the storm, the recall signal Mason had used with his K-9 partners throughout his career. He hadn't planned it consciously, but some deep instinct had prompted the command. The response was immediate and unexpected. Shadow emerged from the darkness behind Donovan, materializing like a ghost from the swirling snow. The shepherd didn't attack, but positioned herself strategically between Mason and his adversary, her posture communicating clear warning. Donovan froze, suddenly finding himself caught between handler and dog. "Remarkable," he murmured, genuine appreciation in his voice despite the circumstances. "She's bonded with you already. That's exactly why she's so valuable. Emotional intelligence combined with tactical training." "She's not property," Mason stated firmly. "She's chosen her path." "Dogs don't choose," Donovan countered. "They respond to conditioning, to training. She's a product of thousands of hours of specialized development, not some fairy tale about free will." Shadow's growl deepened, as if she understood and objected to his dismissal of her agency. Her amber eyes never left Donovan as she backed slowly toward Mason, maintaining her protective position. Distant shouts indicated the return of Donovan's men, likely having lost Shadow's trail in the worsening conditions. Mason knew their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. "This isn't over, Calloway," Donovan stated calmly. "The storm will pass. Authorities are overwhelmed. We have time and resources you don't." "We have something you'll never understand," Mason replied, beginning to move laterally toward the house with Shadow beside him. "Something worth fighting for beyond profit margins." Before Donovan could respond, a new sound cut through the storm. The distinctive whoomp, whoomp of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. A powerful searchlight suddenly cut through the blizzard conditions, illuminating the property in harsh white light. "This is Colorado State Police," boomed an amplified voice from above. "All persons on the ground remain where you are. This property is now under police protection." Donovan's expression shifted from confidence to calculation in an instant. He assessed the helicopter, the returning figures of his men, and the rapidly changing tactical situation. Without another word, he turned and began signaling to his team, directing them back toward their vehicles. Mason didn't wait to see more. With Shadow beside him, he made his way quickly to the kitchen door, where Emma stood ready with the shotgun. "Perfect timing," she remarked dryly as they entered. "Your vet friend arrived just 10 minutes ago. She's working on the puppy now." The transformation in the bedroom was immediate and striking. Dr. Bennett had established a makeshift veterinary station on the dresser, complete with portable medical equipment she'd somehow transported through the blizzard. Hope lay on a warming pad, tiny IV catheter in place, receiving fluids and medication through a precision pump. "You made it," Mason said, relief evident in his voice as he and Shadow entered the room. Dr. Bennett barely looked up from her work, hands steady as she adjusted medication flow rates. "Snowmobile broke down half a mile out. Had to carry the supplies the rest of the way on foot." She finally glanced up, her expression softening as she spotted Shadow. "Hello, old friend." Shadow approached cautiously, sniffing Dr. Bennett's hands before turning her attention to Hope. The mother dog's concern was palpable as she gently nosed her smallest puppy. "She's responding to treatment," Dr. Bennett assured her, speaking directly to Shadow as one would to a human parent. "Temperature stabilizing, heart rate improving. She's a fighter, just like her mother." The helicopter continued circling overhead, searchlights sweeping the property as Donovan and his men retreated to their vehicles. Through the window, Mason watched the SUVs begin a slow procession down the driveway, clearly under observation from the air. "Highway Patrol coordinated with State Police Air Unit," Dr. Bennett explained, nodding toward the window. "I reached them on my emergency radio when I realized Donovan was here. They diverted the helicopter from another mission." Martha, who had been assisting with Hope's treatment, stepped back to give Dr. Bennett more room. "Is she going to make it?" she asked quietly, the question everyone wanted answered. Dr. Bennett's hands continued their methodical work as she considered. "The next few hours are critical. The infection had progressed further than I'd hoped, but we've got her on the strongest antibiotics available. Her vital signs are already improving." She glanced at Shadow, who remained fixated on her puppy. "A lot depends on her will to live. Judging by her genetics, I'd say that's considerable." A sharp knock at the front door announced the arrival of state police officers, their voices carrying through the house as Bill guided them inside. The lead officer, a woman with captain's bars and the weathered face of someone accustomed to mountain rescues, appeared in the bedroom doorway moments later. "Captain Reynolds, Colorado State Police," she introduced herself briskly. "We received multiple emergency alerts regarding this location: armed hostiles, medical emergency, civilians in danger." Her assessing gaze swept the room, taking in the medical setup, the dogs, the assembled group. "Seems we arrived at an interesting moment." Mason stepped forward, assuming the role of spokesperson. "Mason Calloway, property owner. Those men who just left were attempting to forcibly take possession of these dogs. They're led by Carl Donovan of Sentinel Private Security, operating under dubious legal claims." Captain Reynolds nodded, unsurprised. "We're familiar with Mr. Donovan. His organization operates in several legal gray areas." She gestured toward her radio. "We've instructed the air unit to monitor their departure from the county. They won't be returning tonight. But they will return," Travis spoke up from his position on the bed. "Donovan doesn't abandon high-value assets easily." The captain's attention shifted to Travis, her expression sharpening with recognition. "Travis Bennett, interesting company you're keeping these days." Travis met her gaze without flinching. "I'm trying to correct past mistakes, Captain. Those dogs were part of a program I was involved with. A program that crossed lines I didn't initially recognize." Captain Reynolds studied him for a long moment before turning back to Mason. "We'll need full statements from everyone. In the meantime, we've established a secure perimeter. 2 officers will remain on site until road conditions allow for proper evacuation." As the immediate crisis subsided, the room's focus returned to Hope, still fighting for her life on the makeshift treatment table. Dr. Bennett worked with quiet efficiency, adjusting medications, monitoring vital signs, making minute corrections to the treatment protocol. Shadow hadn't left her puppy's side, her vigilant presence both touching and somehow reassuring. There was something profound in the shepherd's steadfast devotion, a reminder of bonds that transcended circumstance. Mason found himself standing beside Dr. Bennett as she worked, watching her skilled hands with newfound appreciation. "Thank you," he said simply, "for risking everything to get here." She glanced up briefly, a tired smile touching her features. "Some things are worth the risk." The storm continued its assault outside, but within the house, something had fundamentally shifted. The collection of strangers thrown together by circumstance had formed connections that defied easy categorization. Not quite family, but something similarly profound. Emma and Bill moved through the kitchen, preparing food for everyone despite the limited supplies. Martha assisted Dr. Bennett while maintaining careful watch over Travis, whose condition continued to improve. The state police officers established security protocols, communicating with their helicopter team through crackling radios. And at the center of it all, a mother dog maintained silent vigil over her struggling puppy, her quiet devotion more eloquent than words could express. As the night deepened, Hope's condition stabilized further. Her breathing became more regular, her tiny body relaxing as fever subsided. Dr. Bennett finally stepped back, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "I think she's going to make it," she announced quietly. "Not certain yet, but the signs are encouraging." Shadow's response was immediate, a soft whine of what sounded remarkably like relief as she gently licked her smallest puppy. The other 2 puppies, who had remained unnaturally quiet throughout the crisis, suddenly became more active, as if sensing the shift in their sister's condition. Mason found himself overwhelmed by unexpected emotion. The sight of Shadow with her puppies, of Hope fighting back from the brink, blurred before his eyes. He turned away quickly, moving to the window to compose himself. The helicopter had departed, but police cruiser lights still flashed in the driveway, blue and red illuminating the falling snow in rhythmic pulses. The storm was finally beginning to abate, the wind's howl diminishing to a more manageable moan. Dawn was still hours away, but something about the quality of darkness had changed, a subtle shift toward resolution. "She needs a name," Dr. Bennett said softly, appearing beside Mason at the window. The mother, Shadow, was her tactical call sign, not her real name. Mason considered this. What was she called before? Asset K97729, Dr. Bennett replied, distaste evident in her tone. The breeding program didn't encourage personal naming. Bad for objectivity, they claimed. The dehumanization, or whatever the equivalent was for dogs, angered Mason anew. "She deserves better than a number or a tactical designation." "Yes," Dr. Bennett agreed simply. "She does." Mason watched Shadow with her puppies, noting the gentle authority with which she tended to each one. The intelligent awareness in her amber eyes, the dignity she maintained despite everything she'd endured. "Grace," he decided suddenly. "Her name is Grace." Dr. Bennett smiled, genuine warmth replacing the professional detachment she'd maintained while treating Hope. "It suits her." "And the puppies?" she prompted after a moment. "They need names too, especially now that they're likely to survive." Mason had been avoiding this decision, knowing that naming meant commitment, attachment, a future he hadn't planned for. But watching Shadow, Grace, with her puppies, he recognized the futility of pretending these dogs hadn't already claimed a place in his life. "Hope for the little one," he said, the name already established through usage. "The stronger male is Scout. And the middle one," he paused, considering the puppy who balanced between his robust brother and fragile sister. "Ranger." "Good names," Dr. Bennett approved. "Strong names for dogs with important futures." The implication wasn't lost on Mason. These weren't just any puppies. They were descendants of an exceptional working dog with genetics and early experiences that would shape their potential. The question of their future, and Grace's, remained unresolved. "Donovan will file legal claims," Mason acknowledged, voicing the concern that hung over their momentary victory. "He's got resources, connections." "Yes," Dr. Bennett agreed. "But so do we." She turned to face him directly. "You were one of the most respected canine trainers in Colorado, Mason. Your testimony about Grace's condition, about the abuse she suffered, will carry weight. And I've documented everything. Her injuries, her condition, the puppy's development." "Legal battles are expensive," Mason countered. "And lengthy. Some fights are worth having," she replied, echoing his earlier sentiment to Grace. "Some bonds worth protecting." As if understanding she was being discussed, Grace looked up from her puppies, her gaze meeting Mason's across the room. In that connection, Mason felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose, of rightness, of belonging. The storm would pass, challenges would remain, but in that moment, watching Grace with her puppies, watching Hope defy the odds yet again, Mason recognized a fundamental truth. Family wasn't always what you were born into. Sometimes it was what found you when you needed it most. In the quiet moments of life's winter seasons, it's often the unexpected connections that warm our hearts most deeply. Like Mason Calloway, many of us have built walls after loss, retreating from relationships that might bring both joy and pain. Yet Grace's story reminds us that even in our retirement years, new purpose can find us when we least expect it. The abandoned mother dog who fought against all odds for her puppies mirrors our own resilience through life's storms. Remember that second acts happen at any age, whether it's rescuing an animal, forming new friendships during crisis, or finding courage we thought had faded with youth. Mason discovered that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the souls who show up when the blizzards of life are at their worst. Has an unexpected connection, perhaps with an animal or new friend, changed your life after you thought those chapters were closed? Or like Bill and Emma, have you found renewed purpose by helping others during their difficult moments? Share your story of finding connection or purpose in your retirement years. You never know who might need to hear exactly what you've learned along the way.